The 8-month-old conflict in Tigray seems to end following the government's unilateral call for ceasefire, which was asked by the interim administration of Tigray. The conflict started on 4th November when Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive against regional forces in Tigray in response to an attack on a military base housing government troops there. The escalation came after months of feuding between the federal government and the TPLF. In an offensive declared by the federal government, the National Defense Forces won victory over the terrorist force and forced its remnants to scatter to some hideouts. After completing the law enforcement measures, the federal government has prioritized rebuilding of infrastructures damaged by the terrorist group and rehabilitation of the community affected by the conflict through strong humanitarian responses. Taking into consideration the quest of the people of Tigray region for peace and development with respect to the already started agricultural workers and humanitarian activities in the region.
እኛ ከሄድን በኋላ ምን ይዘውን ይዘን ምን መታውን መተን ተጥቆቻችንን ወስደን
Having finalized the law enforcement operation in Tigray, we have no objective to stay in the state of Tigray. After finalizing the operation properly, we have a plan to deploy our defense force into other fronts. We need preparation for other forces that threaten the nation. It is a priority concern. The nation has various priority lists to handle. Now, we have not any economic and military threat from TPLF. Thus, there is no advantage to stay in the state of Tigray.
The government has accepted the call from the interim administration for a ceasefire. The major turn of events comes after 8 months of intense fighting in the region, with Ethiopia's federal government also calling for a unilateral ceasefire. In a statement, the federal government said the ceasefire will enable farmers to till their land, aid groups to operate without a military movement around, and engage with remnants of Tigray's former ruling party, who seek peace, adding that efforts to continue to bring Tigray's former leaders to justice will not stop. Ethiopia said the ceasefire would last until the end of the farming season in Tigray in September. The government's unilateral decision to cease fire for the conflict in Tigray has now paved a way for political scrutiny among critics. Addressing journalists on the issue, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the Ethiopian army pulled out of the Tigray regional capital of Mekelle because it was no longer a center of gravity for conflicts, stressing the possibility of returning back when necessary.
ማሸነፍ አይደለም በተደጋጋሚ ሰሞኑን ሲናገሩ ሰምታችኋል
As you have seen before, the TPLF has no prospect of winning the battle. Rather, they want to turn things into ashes like what happened in the military operation. They are preparing strategy and tactics how to demolish things in the region. This is the only objective they have had now. I can also mention so many showcases how we are under pressure to discontinue our smart development plan to the nation. This pressure comes from foreign countries.
ላነሳላችሁ ይችላል አሁን ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ
He said Mekelle was government center, a center for known and unknown resources. But by the time we exit, there is nothing special about it. And now it has lost its center of gravity in the current context. It was the first public statement by the federal government since the ENDF pulled out of Mekelle on Monday. The Premier confirmed the withdrawal of the National Army from Mekelle. When government forces entered Mekelle 7 months ago, it was because it was the center of gravity for conflict. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the redeployment of the National Defense Force comes due to less imminent power of TPLF and to make the nation focus on other business. In addressing journalists, the Premier reiterated the government of Ethiopia has been analyzing concerns for a week before the announcement of the ceasefire in the state of Tigray. TPLF is fully aware of the fact that it can't beat the National Defense Force, Abiy said. It has also resorted to turn things into ashes just like its gangs during the law enforcement operation, Abiy underscored. Realizing the law enforcement operation, the Ethiopia's National Defense Force has been confronted with armed groups, but currently armed individuals are attacking the defense force at the back. The government of Ethiopia has now decided on the ceasefire as part of the move being made to tackle the negative impact of conflict and instabilities in Tigray. There have also been repeated international calls for an end to the fighting, which has been punctuated by reports of brutal gang rapes and mass killings of civilians. At least 12 aid workers have also been killed, according to different reports. Tigray in recent days has seen some of the fiercest fighting of the conflict. International pressure on Ethiopia spiked again last week. The government vowed serious law enforcement measures against anybody who will exploit the ceasefire for malicious agenda.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our program. Jeff Pierce is a journalist, historian, and prolific writer with unusual and compelling stories. He has written a number of books and articles on Ethiopia, including Prevail, the inspiring story of Ethiopia's victory over Mussolini's invasion. He's my guest today in this edition of Addis Dialogue, and do stay with us. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
You have written books and articles on Ethiopia, including Prevail, the inspiring story of Ethiopia's victory over Mussolini's invasion. What's so special about Ethiopia, and why are you so interested in the country?
Okay. The thing about the story that attracted me was it literally lends itself. There's never been a story like this I've come across that so neatly fits into drama. If you wrote this as a novel, nobody would believe it. You have a sovereign African nation, which is independent. You have fascists invade it, brazenly invade it, and the Western world says, well, that's very sad. Well, too bad we can't help you, even though they're supposed to be your allies. And so the nation faces things alone. Now, the thing is, in a normal 3-act structure of drama, you have a situation, then you have things get worse. And of course, as we know, things got a lot worse for Ethiopia. They stood alone. The Italians invaded. You have massacres. You have looting of relics. You have mass crimes done against the populace. You have half the country occupied. In the Addis Ababa massacre alone of the Graziani massacre, you have a conservative estimate of 20,000 people slaughtered. That doesn't even take into account the number that are killed in the Debre Libanos massacre and so forth. Now, the thing is, if you compare that to the rest of the colonialist history of Africa, that should be where the story ends. And yet, out of all that comes a people who say, nope, we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep going on. And all of the Western histories, with a couple of exceptions that I've read, are kind of ridiculous because they make the story stop at 36 and go, well, that's it. That's over. And they treat it as war. And my research found that no, there was a continuous resistance literally from the day that the Italians rolled into the capital. There were snipers up in the mountains over shooting down at the Italians. And so this insurgency of the patriots continued right up until liberation. And then you have this heroic saving of the nation, which is just an amazing story. You couldn't write this as a movie and have it believed. It's just, there are stories in there that you're looking at the individual cases of courage. And I've been privileged to have met Jagamakelo before he died and was telling me adventures while he lay in bed. There's the story of Lekalesh Bayan, the female patriot. You have all these wonderful heroes and characters. I mean, at one point, I was reading old files in the British archives, and I came across a story where the Italian soldiers were so demoralized that they were hiding down underneath a railway car so that when it drove into a station, they were hiding and the patriots were sniping at them with rifles. And so they radio back, and the other soldiers don't want to go. The Italians don't want to go. So they send another train. They're like huddled, and they smash into the first train. And they got 2 trains of Italians, and it's like comedy. And you're looking at this going, this is for real. This is an actual British account of the story. You couldn't make these things up. And it's just amazing, the heroism and courage. And so you fall in love with the story. So people always ask me, how did you get interested? Why do you care so much about this? And I always say back to them, who do I have to be? Look at the story, look at the narrative, look how amazing this is. This should be taught in Western schools. This should be taught in schoolrooms in Europe. This should be taught in schoolrooms in the United States. 20,000 Black Americans marched in Harlem on August 3rd, 1935 for Ethiopia. This is before Martin Luther King. This is before Malcolm X. You had people walking around going, don't call me Black, don't call me Negro, I'm Ethiopian. They said that. And do you know where the slogan, hands off Ethiopia, that is all over social media came from today?
Yeah.
It came from there. They had signs saying, hands off Ethiopia. So here we are, unfortunately, full circle, back to a time where we have to use that slogan again.
Yeah, indeed. Jeff, you also argue that it is essential that there be a greater understanding and appreciation of Ethiopian history, both by Ethiopians and the people overseas. Can you explain that to me?
I don't think the problem is that we're dealing with people who, we're dealing with journalists and to a certain degree, analysts who their whole approach is from the perspective of treating, it's a very colonial mindset that treats Ethiopians and to a certain extent Africans in general as people to be studied. There's no empathy there. There's no sympathy there. There's no appreciation of the history of Ethiopia. And my own personal, this is my own personal view in terms of researching the history. And I intend to write a new history of Ethiopia where I lay out the proof for this. But all of my research suggests that the different ethnic peoples of the country have worked collaboratively and cooperatively since time immemorial, far more than is depicted in the history. The common history that you get would pit Tigrayans against Amhara, Amhara against Oromo, and so forth, and this people against that people. Well, everything that I've read so far shows that they were far more collaborative, cooperative than is depicted. But look at the news coverage that we're seeing today. It portrays the conflict as if it's rooted in ethnic conflict rather than a political one. So you're starting with this colonial mindset that says, oh, well, the Africans want to kill each other. They've always wanted to kill each other. No one would analyze a European conflict this way, with the notable exception of the Balkans, where they use that same kind of rubric. But you had the same kind of condescension towards Eastern Europe that is